Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme movie show Sci-Fi edition, where we're going to discuss what I consider to be the best movie of 2019, and that's Upgrade. Upgrade is a extremely small, low-budget film. It's part science fiction, part body horror, if you want to consider it that. You could say it's a little bit of a romance, a little bit of a revenge film. You could compare it to Death Wish in a sci-fi setting. Some people call it a cyberpunk type movie. There's a lot of good ways that you can describe this film, and all of them would be equally successful because it's a very tight script, very well shot movie, well acted, and it's got some great action scenes in it too. So rarely does a film come along like Upgrade that captures my attention from start to finish, and I think it's just enjoyable to watch, not just visually, but also in terms of the writing, the music score, everything about it is perfect. I haven't seen a lot of films, I'll be the first to admit, so there may be some people who say there's no way you could say a little tiny film like Upgrade would be the best movie of all time, but I think for 2019 it was by far the most entertaining, the most thoughtful, and just a completely underrated gem of a movie. And if you have not seen it, I will say go out and see this movie as soon as possible. And sit back, relax, and be reminded of what it's like to watch something that's engaging. It doesn't belittle you or talk down to you, but also is very entertaining. So ultimately, Upgrade is a very simplistic title. It's basically about a man who, if you want to describe it, he's an analog man in a digital world. It's basically a way of describing something that happens to him where he ends up getting in a car accident with his wife and ends up getting an upgrade chip because he was paralyzed, and then he's able to actually do things he couldn't do before. So um, Upgrade can be used in a lot of ways for it too. Good evening, Tom. Good to see you. Send more links. Um, Dr. Venkman's got some other things going on. Eric, so he's not there. Old man, I don't have links to send. So for Upgrade, let me just start off by talking about how it is at the very beginning. There's a scene where he's working on his Pontiac Firebird. He's got all the digital stuff around her, so the camera lingers on it, and it just shows him kind of listening to music, doing his thing. His wife comes home, and she's in one of those self-driving cars. Now, whether this was meant to portend the future in terms of, say, Tesla, which is doing that now or not, don't know, but it's certainly something that's been promised ever since the Jetsons at the very least. And it's interesting how you're being shown these differences between an analog world, which means nothing digital, not too much electronics, everything's either done by hand or with wires rather than chips and processors and whatnot. And for this movie, you get the feeling that these two, the man and wife, very much in love. They even talk about how she works for this company, I believe, called Cobalt, which works on very advanced things, whereas he works on old cars for very rich people. So there's, I wouldn't call it irony, but it's very obvious when you watch it, and after a second or third review, that some of these things really start to stand out to you. How from the very beginning, you're being shown as a viewer two possible outcomes: what it's like to live, say, without a cell phone, without all this technology, but also what it means to live in a world where you're surrounded by it and almost can't exist with it. So for this movie here, um, like I said, there's a scene where they're going in a car to go somewhere, and the car takes control of itself. And the guy doesn't like being in it because the car's got that stupid little Alexa type voice to it, talking, and he's trying to tell it to shut off. He doesn't know what to do. His wife can't get it to stop. The car just speeds off, hits a bump into like a little bum tent town, and rolls over. And they're both completely messed up on the brink of death. And the wife, crawls out, and a group of people show up. And this is your clue that, hey, this is not the police, this is something else. So there's something larger at play. And you get a situation where He's sitting there and he's paralyzed, he can't move, and they shoot his wife. And then they apparently shoot him as well. So you're like, wow, what a way to start. And that's one of the great things about some movies is you just have a really wonderful hook. We've talked about this a lot with when we reviewed the James Bond movies on the very beginning of the Xtreme movie show when we went through all of them and ranked them. How great an opening hook does, whether it's related to the movie or not, it really gets you in. And definitely this is very successful with Upgrade. And also, too, it's neat because they give you shots of what actually probably would happen and actually does happen today. We just don't think about it, where you have drones overhead taking real-time HD snapshots of it and trying to find data and looking at stuff. And this is pretty cool because it's not only what happens in this case where one's killed and the other one's paralyzed, the husband, Great Trace is his name. You get to see how technology affects younger people and the way they go about doing things. So what happens is there's a scene where it shows that he's completely paralyzed. He's going to maybe get an implant put in him. Eventually, he gets one, and I think it's a great acting job. He's got the curled fingers. He looks like somebody that spent time in a wheelchair. If you've experienced that in your personal life, you would recognize that. I think I definitely certainly have. And so he goes to see the lady who is the cop in charge of the investigation, and it's like 3 or 4 months later. So she goes on to say, I'm really sorry, gives him the big speech about blah blah, and he's having nothing of it. He simply says, what have you got? And she again, blah 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 blah, and he's like, so you have nothing. And the thing is all of a sudden you start to realize that this lady really does not know how to work as a detective in what we would call, say, the analog world, by knocking on doors, asking questions, by having hookups in neighborhoods. It's not that kind of culture anymore. She sits behind a desk, she looks at all this drone footage, she looks at all these reports, and that's it. So it's pretty interesting to see that there's this dichotomy going on of the guy expects something to have happened over 3 or 4 months, and she's just giving him the sugarcoating bit, and he's having nothing of it. So down in the dumps and everything, he goes to his home, which is a smart home. He doesn't really like it, but he has to have it to give him medicine. So he is struggling with the way of having to get the medicine implanted in him. And then he gets the thought, life's not worth living. My wife is dead. I'm sick of the way the world is. I'm going to kill myself. He's suicidal. So he keeps telling the machine, to inject him with medicine. There was an error. Inject me more. Inject me more. After a while, he thinks he's going to, after 4 or 5 shots, thinks he's probably going to die and get enough of the dosage to kill himself. But of course, the device is a smart device and shuts down and basically says, I will have to call like the police or whatever for it. And so he can't even kill himself with the help of technology. And so this is where it's kind of ironic and funny in a way. He hits an all-time low because he doesn't have the physical capability to do it himself. He has to rely on the machine, and the machine can't even do it at all. So at this point, the person he had made this old car for is a really rich guy, and it's a really fantastic looking setup. The guy's got a home that's basically on the side of a cliff on this ocean, that there's these two giant rocks and that you have to go down these stairs. It's very futuristic looking, and on the drive there, if you'd watched the film, you would have seen the skyscrapers in the city that have their hydroponic, I'm guessing, gardens on there, and the whole futuristic thing of self-sufficiency that would be allegedly what happens in the future as we grow and entertain a bigger population. This guy pays him a visit, and he looks like a very young guy, and he looks like a guy that you go, well, wait a minute, the guy can't act, but then you're going, well, wait a minute, the guy's on drugs, and you go, no, the guy admits, hey, he doesn't say he's smart, but he is. He basically says, I don't know what it's like to function in a social environment. I don't get out a lot. I've been trapped in working on special projects, and I have something for you if you're interested. I have a chip appropriately named STEM that we can put in you, and it would allow you the ability to maybe walk again and function like a normal human being. The catch is of course, it's something that's not on the market yet. You have to sign the non-disclosure agreement, and it may not work. But of course, Gray Trace is beside himself, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to do it." He signs it, and then they have the little surgery moment where you see it, and they show some futuristic things and all that, and it's kind of neat. You see how digital technology is starting to be more commonplace in surgery and in the medical field these days, which it is. So that's a nice touch. He gets the chip implanted, and this is the upgrade that supposedly helps this analog guy live in a digital world, which we'll see whether or not that's actually effective. So, for me, at this point, you're about a third of the movie in, and you're saying, okay, what's really going on here? It's There's a lot, like I say, to digest. His wife died. They were very much in love. It seemed like they were a very happy couple, no kids. There's all these conflicting things going on. But as soon as he gets this chip put in him, he's able to kind of walk a little bit. He's able to start exercising. He's able to kind of see what's going on. And so, of course, what does he have? He has revenge on his mind. He wants to find out who killed his wife and get revenge. That's what he's living for. So in a way, you could look at it like a romance or revenge thriller a little bit. Some people might think of this as like Death Wish in a cyberpunk environment. So right now, it's not particularly graphic, despite the opening scene. Like I say, it's a very lean movie. It was only made for a couple $1 million, but shot beautifully, and it reminds you, God, what can you do with a $5 million budget? You can do as much as a $200 million blockbuster tentpole franchise can do. It's fantastic. So here, basically, he gets into a situation where he's in his house, and STEM starts to talk to him, and he thinks he's hallucinating, and then realize he's not. He's realizing that STEM is communicating with him, can read his thoughts, and can talk to him by like bone conduction through his jaw. The chip's placed in the back of his neck and a spinal cord, so he's going through some of the photographs of the incident because the detective couldn't figure anything out, and STEM being able to take the vision from his eyes sees something. And so basically, going up the boss chain, as we like to describe, he finds out where one of the guys that was involved in this assassination, for lack of a better attempt, lives. So he goes to see him. So yeah, $6 Million Man, 2019 style. Ed Burr, absolutely right. I mean, that's the obvious one from the 1970s show, which is pretty fun to watch. This I think is so much more. So what he does is he actually goes to that, and it's interesting because he goes to the guy's house, and even in a crappy part of town, technology is advanced enough where people have like smart, not just tablets or smartphones or smart TVs. They have smart desks that you can work off and everything. So he's getting ready to break into the house, and STEM is talking to him. He's like, "May I point something out?" Um, and also because of the drone footage, he went up to the house in his wheelchair so he wouldn't be caught on film. So he sees the guy leave. He goes in the house and he's looking for information. Well, it turns out that the guy turns around and comes back, and then they get into this fight because he wants to find out who hired him, what it's about, and the guy won't say anything. So this is where it gets interesting because if you haven't seen this movie, there's a fight scene. And I do not know how they shot this fight scene, but again, on a very small budget, to see what happens here for a couple minutes is extraordinary. And not only is the action fantastic, the acting is as well. And by that I mean this. They have a fight. He's kind of losing it, and Stem is saying, "If you allow me to take over, I will, do that." And so he says, "I give you permission." So Stem does it, and all of a sudden takes control of his body. And the guy's like the super ninja $6 million man thing, where the guy's throwing punches, trying to stab him, he's doing all these things in this small little house, and the guy's got this look of astonishment on his face of, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And he's kind of like trying to talk out loud to Stem, like, "Oh my God, he's trying to stab me," yet he's doing all these moves and everything. And there's a very, very graphic scene at the end that you're like, "Ooh, that's kind of disgusting. That's kind of gross." And at the end, he's like, "What the hell just happened?" And Stem is like, "I advise you to clean up the place before you leave. The police will be on their way." And he's like, "I don't know what I touched." And he goes, I took a record of everything that you have touched." So you're like, holy crap, this thing's kind of useful. So he has this relationship with technology that's allowing him to be successful so far, which is a bit ironic because he doesn't like to depend on that. So this is HBO. This is a movie that came out, and I don't even know if it's on any of the streaming services right now. If not, I would think it should be. I imagine Prime may have it, Ed, if you're interested. I went to go see it in a theater. It was out, I think, a year ago, very quickly, like maybe in October. It came and went just like that. Okay, Ed Brewer saying HBO. Yeah, if you got HBO, must watch. If you have other means of seeing it, go see it. I normally don't gush, but I wanted to go ahead and do this because I've been looking forward to reviewing this. So he finds out from this first guy that he worked with somebody else, a guy named, I believe, Tolan. And so he's going to go to this bar and go up the boss chain, figure out more information. So he goes to this bar, and it's like this cyberpunk bar. Everybody's got like body mods, self-mutilated, whether you call that tattoos, piercings, those types of things. Very crappy looking place and all that. And of course, he goes in there in his wheelchair, and there's this neat little scene in there where he kind of talks to everybody and says, excuse me, I just want to let everybody know here that I'm looking for the person that killed blah blah blah," and everybody's thinking he's making fun of him or whatever. And so finally, one guy kind of steps up and says, "Bro, you can't be serious." And he's like, "Yes, I am." And there's a neat line too, because he tells the bad guy tells, or a bad guy tells the bartender, "Turn the music back up." And he takes him in a wheelchair, takes him into the back room, and he's basically going to kill him and figure out what he knows. But Great Trace has one up on the guy. He's basically like, "Go ahead, stem, take control." And so he ends up having this graphic fight with him, but you really don't see it because what he's really doing is taking a knife and torturing the guy. And it's interesting because the room that they're in kind of looks like it's from Saw. I think some of the people from Saw were involved in this movie, whether writing it, directing it. Lee Wan-al, I believe, is his name, if that's how it's pronounced. So it kind of reminds you of this scene because at the end you see the guy just laying there and his face is all shredded up from a knife, and he's got more information. You're like, oh my god. But you start to realize that people have body mods. And so it turns out that he wasn't shot by one of his assailants. Stem had pointed out to him that no, the gun was in his right hand. In his left hand, he shot you. And he's like, oh, I see. So he's starting to realize that the different people involved in here all are modified, and they have, for lack of a better term, different powers or different abilities with these body mods. And it's interesting too because the bad group of guys has a main bad dude who he's looking for that you start to see, who he looks like a young kind of millennial guy with this mustache. He's very not imposing looking, but there's a scene in there where after this bar scene he walks in and he goes up to the bartender and says, "You let one of my men die." And the bartender gets his gun out. He's like, "I'm going to shoot you, get out of here." And it's like, "Hachoo," and he sneezes, and you get this fantastic little shot of these nanotechnology type things coming from a sneeze that get into the guy's brain and whack him out. It's really just interesting. And so this movie, backing up before we get to the third act, is, like I say, it's a combination of things. But one of the great things about it is you get equal parts of the revenge, of the action, of the comedy part of it with the acting a little bit, but also of just the brutality of what's going on and just a hint of what it means. And you're watching this guy all along who hates technology, having to depend on it to get his revenge. Now, whether you not think revenge is a good or bad thing, that's an individual choice. Whether it's going to destroy him as a human being, we don't know. But it does get deeper. The guy's mom is helping out with everything too, so it's kind of nice to see that that happens. But frankly, the guy knows that he's getting close, and so for him, he's got one or two more people to go before he gets to the ending you think is going to happen. So my audio's in and out. Ed is saying I'm seeing everything at an excellent connection here, so hopefully that stays. I'm trying not to talk too fast. So the guy that gave him the implant is basically trying to shut him down now because he told him, "Hey, I can't have you going around and killing people. It's not good for business." So he's trying to remotely shut him down. And he ends up having to go to some off the grid person who can rootkit it and kind of make STEM function on its own without being shut down. And he barely survives that. So there's a little scene in there. And what's interesting about it, besides the fact that STEM now is rootkitted in his system, is that he can't be shut off, so he can control STEM and use STEM's abilities. The fact is this lady that he visits before there's a fight, there's some people just kind of like with these eyeglasses on, and they're just kind of moving around like they're at a trance or a rave. And he's like, "What are they doing?" And he's like, "Oh, they're VRing for a couple of days." And It's kind of sad that you think that they make the comment about how people will stay into virtual reality for days on end, and hours on end, just because there's really no other good alternative. It's happier to be online rather than in the real world. And so again, they don't in this movie. The director doesn't really show you more than just what you need to kind of watch and take from it, that this is the world that we currently live in. It's not necessarily a futuristic thing. It's how things are. But with a little bit more of help, he finds out that he gets to go to the bad guy, and he wants to kill him. So they end up meeting, and the main bad dude, the guy with this mustache, he's just a better fighter. He's just better at being a merc. He gets the upper hand, and Stem is trying to help him out, and Stem is like, "There's nothing I can do." So he goes back to being a human in a way, in an analog thinking manner, and he starts to antagonize the guy, and he starts to get under his skin a little bit. And so this goes on a little bit, and he's able to kind of just barely defeat the main bad dude about it, the head of all these mercs who killed his wife. So he does that in another gory, disgusting display that's really creative but very violent. He finds out that the entire main guy that implanted him with the stem chip, he needs to go talk to. And so he goes to meet the guy back at the original house at the beginning. And then all of a sudden, kind of like the movie Saw, you get this big exposition scene where it turns out that the guy that implanted him with it was not under his own self control. It turns out that STEM was something he had been working on, this artificial intelligence contained in a chip. It kind of overtook him and basically forced all of these things to happen. The accident, uh, particularly identifying somebody who was an analog type person that would be receptive to receiving this chip, because he wanted a life of his own. And what STEM did was is he kind of created this virtual sense where he met his wife again, and he was so hurt he kind of checked out, and so now STEM has gained full consciousness over Gray Trace's entity as human being, and the last scene is him basically leaving. So the whole plot twist is that STEM had evolved to a point before you knew at the beginning of this movie that set all these separate acts that kind of weren't related, and we saw that detective part where this guy put them all together towards the end, was done by artificial intelligence. So it's a very ironic twist on supposedly, intelligence overtaking things and the fear of it growing too much, which we've been hearing about for 50 years. And like I said, it reminds you of the Saw movie where you go back and you go, oh, okay, this is related. This explains that. This explains that. And even if they didn't have that ending, it would still be satisfactory. But it's just a nice little twist on it. And it's about one of the most hardcore sci fi films I've seen in the past few years, about having to deal with technology, romance, human interaction. How would you do things? The detective who really has to rely on technology to do her job because, frankly, she just doesn't know any other way. It's like people in mathematics today who don't know multiplication tables because they're hardly taught anymore, or they're just taught to put everything in the computer rather than how to diagnose problems. There's just a lot of positive things to say about this movie, and like I say, unfortunately, it's one of those movies that comes out, and I don't know who said it recently, but it's one of those movies where you don't have to think hard about it. There's not some hidden meaning in it. There's just a lot of interesting things presented to you as a viewer that you can choose to watch or ignore. But if you watch it a second or third time, some things pop at you a bit more. And it has a twist, which it didn't need, but the twist is very good. And you don't really see the twist coming until the end, the way it's written. Very tight script, shot very well. Again, micro budget type movie. I wish more of these could be done, but Upgrade, with the few movies that I saw for 2000, actually 18, not 2019, I believe it came out. Best movie, most entertaining movie of the year for me personally. So I'm gonna take a look at some of the comments that some of you guys have. Old Man Comics, hey, didn't see you there earlier, so I went on. Yes, you said great friggin' flick, absolutely. I'm glad. I know you'll have a lot to say about it. I'm sure we'll talk about this movie some more. Um, I know Dr. Venkman's got it on his watch list. Let's see. Ahsoka's question for the movies. You stopped watching a lot. What's the limit to how little we can put in? 10. We just do more. Let's see, Ed Brewer says it's on HBO. He said I was in and out. And that's it, guys. So, yes, Upgrade. Fantastic film. Believe me, talk to E anytime. I'm not a hype guy, but this movie, I just rewatched it over the weekend again to see whether or not it still gave me that same opinion about it. Absolutely fantastic. I described it as an instant classic. Fantastic film. It's what I think of when I think of science fiction. So for myself, for E, for the doctor, for everybody that's involved with the Extreme Movie Show, thanks for listening. Stay extreme, guys. And of course, watch the movie and let us know what you think. Take care. Good night.